I'd like you to say one short phrase about why clean or healthy water is important to you or your community. So we'll start at this table right here. Yep, and just try to speak up. You can stand, your name and whom you represent.
I speak better not here.
Okay.
I'm Don Faulkner, and I'm not here to represent any particular organization. I'm a member of a number of conservation organizations. If I've ever been anything in my life, it's been a talker and a conservator. Water is connected to all of us, to soil, to plants, to animals, the cosmos, and to the extent that our water is damaged, all is, and to me, all is creation. And don't get me talking about God, because I can't think God and creation. I think it's all one.
Thank you, sir. Very well put. And let's go around the table.
I'm Brian Wagner of Ecosystem Services and Clean Water. As a parent and a native Virginian, I had the great fortune of having a lot of the ability to fish and wade and swim in clean water, and I hope that and wish that and working for that for my children and everyone's children as well.
Mm-hmm.
I'm Kip Muma. I'm also with Ecosystem Services, also a member of the steering committee for the Middle James Roundtable. And clean water is absolutely important. I think Mr. Faulkner kind of summed it up there pretty brilliantly. But it's the same as our natural habitats, and really believe in working towards making those habitats here for future generations.
I'm John Coe, from Harbaugh, and I grew up in Shenandoah County on the Shenandoah River. I've seen the river come up, I've seen it down, I've seen it be clean, I've seen it dirty. I want to make sure that everything's clean for my grandchildren.
Morning, everybody. I'm Chris Anderson. I'm with the Shenandoah Valley Pure Water Forum and the White House Farm Foundation in Luray, Virginia. Gosh, that's it. It's hard to say why it wouldn't be. I think we have a moral imperative as humans to take care of that which we did not create for the benefit quality in the water, and with all the focus on money and finances and the economy, it's a lot cheaper to keep water clean than it is to clean it up after we've fouled up.
Thank you.
Hi, I'm Elizabeth Oots. I'm here on behalf of Environment Virginia, and I would say clean water is important for the recreational value it provides for boating, fishing, swimming, and all that.
Here, I'm Eugenia Anderson Ellis, and I'm in Seaton, Virginia. But I'm also newly the owner of the second largest spring in Augusta County, and it thrills me that people can pull up every time someone pulls up to it. I leave the house and go down and have a chat with them because they bring with them so much history that I don't know. And they talk about as a child, and now they're very elderly, and they still stop by because they remember the taste of pure water. And it's not what they get from their faucet. So I'd love to see that extended and at least protected.
I'm Sally Siegel, and I'm a past board member of DCN, and gosh, Mr. Faulkner just said everything that I believe that our existence to us. Not a granddaughter, so I feel it's huge push to work with you.
And Ann Beal, I'm on the DCN board, for many years, I've taken care of the family farm in Spanish Family Farm
back in the center, where next to Mr. Faulkner, right there. Yeah. Oh. Yes, please.
I'm Margaret O'Brien on the DC board and also member of Richard Hall. I too have grandchildren who feel compelled that they should still have clean water and hopefully the shoreline for Latin and Williamsburg. And I also have a property on Quince Island on Chesapeake Bay. I've been going down to the bay since the early 50s, and I've seen the huge changes in the bay, and so really that's one of my biggest focuses is cleaning up the bay.
Thank you. And this table right here? Sure.
Ted Phillips, member of several groups, and I swim in the ocean almost every morning. That was by ocean. And so, and it's different every morning. Sometimes it's calm, sometimes not. People are coming around and shaking. So, thanks.
That's great to hear. Congratulations for being in the ocean. It's people way in the back. Do you want to contribute? Or just listen in?
I'm just a reporter here.
Oh. Dan?
My name is Steve Reed, and I actually do freelance information and I work with some of the larger environmental organizations as well as they don't have time.
And this middle back table here? Sure.
Hi, my name is Mary McKenna, and I'm here on behalf of the Virginia Military Institute. And for me, the most important issue is health. I'm Karen Forget, and I'm the director of Lynn Haven River now. And I could probably talk for an hour about why clean water is important. But I also am lucky enough to live close to the Atlantic Ocean. And in Virginia Beach, we watch the sunrise over the ocean and watch the sunset over the Lynn Haven River and eat from the river and from the bay and kayak and swim and fish is what our way of life is all about. So clean water is critical.
I'm Roger Dietrich. I'm a party member of the Museum Board and the Sierra. Grew up on a farm in the West, and water was our survival. Really too much was always what drove our livelihood.
Thank you.
Steve Bruckner, Sierra Club, Justin Bruckner, UCM Board. Key issue for us, water sustainability. It's a multi-use product, just as we need it for our health. A lot of businesses depend on it for commerce, or some other businesses like fracking would like to use it because it's a good place to dump their waste. And so this is a very live issue for us because we're in conflict with commercial interests that try using this as a free resource as a way to handle their waste problem. So that's really the crux of our issue and what we have to deal with.
Thank you.
My name is Lisa Brown. I was a Tidewater Community College. And my concern is basically what everybody else has, but I'd also like to talk about the fact that you're pumping all these chemicals into the water from our sinks and from our toilets, putting hormones that we dump our medicine bottles out. And we're seeing feminizing effects in fish and other animals, and that really concerns me a lot, as well as what we're doing to human health with regards to cancers. So I'd really like to see us get more involved in cleaning up the water that we're using now.
Thank you.
My name is Katie. I'm with the Virginia Army National Guard Environmental Section. I'm Fort Pickett. And water is important. We need to protect it now, clean it up now, because it's going to be part of the future.
My name is Susan McSwain, and I'm with too many groups to mention, but my job is as a solid waste and recycling coordinator. And too many people, garbage is out of sight, out of
John Siegel, I will represent myself. As today, I saw a satellite photograph of filthy water coming out of the Susquehanna River, heading to Village. It's a result of the recent rain event in Oklahoma.
You know, those are dramatic photos.
My name is Chad Meyer. I'm a geologist out of Lynchburg, Virginia. My main interest in some of the topics that we're discussing here today, as a former petroleum geologist actually involved in natural gas development, definitely interested in the fracking issue and how that impacts our water supply here in Virginia. And just as someone who lives here, someone who takes advantage of the drinking water and the reservoirs and so forth, we're blessed in Lynchburg with the Petro Reservoir and very, very good water down there. But, excuse me, just as a citizen, I think we shouldn't take our water supply for granted the way probably most Americans do. And in some cases that has been, you can set yourself up for environmental disaster if you're not active about the water to let large companies take control of the water supply rather than standing up for the citizen and getting involved and being educated.
Thank you.
I'm Malcolm Cameron. I'm from Rockingham County, and with various groups, Friends of Shenandoah Mountain. I grew up in the Chesapeake Bay. I saw the decline of the water there when I was younger, and I'm very concerned now about our watersheds and the GW National Forest, particularly in things like hydrocrack. And I'm proud of our county supervisors there in Rockingham who were able to convince them that approving that first drilling permit was not such a good idea. They really looked into it.
Thank you. You might wonder why it took so much time of the really scarce time that we have for this presentation. Partly I did really want you to know each other. The other reason is this topic is about building consensus. And I know of no better way to do that than for us to tell our stories, even if they are in snippets, even if they are stories of things lost, stories of things that we're afraid might happen. The other reason is that, as you all have very eloquently put, water, like just about any other natural resource, whether it be air or the land that we walk upon, connects us all. And therefore, with those stories, we are connected. With the water resource, we are connected both to each other, to the land, and to the ecology of the land. So I'd like you to kind of hold that these are the reasons why we're here, and we know that those are the reasons why we're here, but that there is great power in words, and I truly believe that. So what I'm going to try to do today is, hit the button first. We just did this. You were all, I think we hit just about everything. I'm very glad somebody brought up the spiritual, because that is another source of nourishment for all of us, no matter how we define things. What I'm going to try to do today is tell you a few stories about how the organization that I'm involved in works at building consensus. And I'll talk a little bit about the Bay TMDL, but honestly, it's hard to talk about in a short snippet of time, and Jason did a nice job of giving a little bit of overview. I'll be here for a while afterwards, so if people want to ask me specific questions about that, I'm really happy to share. The organization that I work for is a fairly new organization, and we do indeed follow the water. As I'm thinking everybody here probably knows what a watershed is. It's a containment or a catchment basin. It describes how the water flows from the highest to the lowest point in a given topography, exiting into another body of water. Because that's the way the water works, one might ask, isn't that the way we ought to manage it? Well, we should, but it's not so easy. You'll see here, these are the beginning of the conversation about watershed versus political boundaries. So This places the particular watershed that we're focused on, the Rivanna, as part of the James drainage. So we're just downstream and exiting into the James downstream of the rockfish and tide that are part of Nelson County's contribution to the Middle James, or Middle Upper James. And within the context of a larger watershed, the Chesapeake Bay. Again, there is the Chesapeake Bay outline. There are all the jurisdictions in Virginia. And there we are, a little red watershed in amongst all those lines. We begin like where we are now, but a little further to the northeast. We begin in the Blue Ridge and empty into the James. The elevation change of this watershed is about 2,400 feet, so it's pretty dramatic in terms of transversing a number of physiographic regions. On the other hand, we're fairly small, 770 square miles. Some people in their nomenclature might call us a sub-watershed. About 135 to 140,000 people live in this watershed. This watershed is home to a number of important fish species. There's been a number of different assessments, but we know that's what some of the important ones are. Longfin darter, striped-back darter, and we have brook trout in our upper streams. I don't know if that's true for Nelson County. I believe it is in some portions of the county here. And those of you who are fish people, or at least freshwater fish people, might know these species as well. All of them play a role in keeping the water or the stream ecology intact and sustainable. Also home to a number of mussel species, particularly the James River spiny mussel has been found in a number of places in the Rivanna, and that's has been the linchpin around some of the protection efforts that have gone on. The Nature Conservancy in about 2000 named the Rivanna watershed as one of the best or last remaining healthy and intact Upper Piedmont streams. So what do we do with this thing about political boundaries? In other words, that is another way of trying to define ourselves, and it's a way in which we have conversations about what we believe in and where our commonalities are, which is what consensus is all about. So I'm going to show you, I don't know that there's a pointer on this, but we're down here, I don't even know if we're on this map. We're right on the corner of the map where you see Nelson, and then it turns into non-map up in the Blue Ridge. But this is going to show you how we're put together. In fact, a little bit of Nelson County, a little bit of Orange, a little bit of Louisa, quite a bit of Savannah, a little over half of Greene, about 2/3 of Albemarle, and all of Charlottesville. In 2004, we were created as a commission by an act of the General Assembly. And these are the words that did this. It did not come with any money or anything like that, at least from the state or the localities. But we are an entity of local government, so although we are nonprofit, like a local government, we're not a 501c3. We advocate for, by means of recommendations, and primarily policy recommendations, to the local governments that we serve. We have 2 elected officials from the 4 major land-owning counties in the city of Charlottesville who sit on our commission. We have an appointed citizen from each of those 4 localities. Then we have representation from the 2 soil and water conservation districts that overlap the watershed. Important for building consensus, essential for building consensus, is understanding the state of the resource. These numbers come out of a very extraordinarily useful and important resource that we are lucky to have in our watershed, a very strong aquatic benthic macroinvertebrate monitoring network that has been put together by an organization called Streamwatch. And this is one of their reports that runs with data through 2009. And the news is not all that great, obviously. If you look at that green, very good. There's only a sliver. And fair and poor put together, and very poor are almost 3/4 by this methodology. So obviously there's issues. A lot of water bodies are at risk to meet the Virginia Aquatic Standard. As a commission, we started out strongly science-based, looking at the major threats. This scene should be not too unfamiliar for those unfamiliar with the Virginia Piedmont. We have a history of land clearing in the 1800s that led to land clearing and damming of our rivers that led to massive incisement of our streams in those fairly soft soils. The reasons why in our modern era that this persists are the things that you know about: impervious surfaces, development, patterns of development. This is a very old slide. We're fortunate also to have very good current information for our watershed that's actually rather startling. The conventional wisdom up until just a couple of years ago was that if a watershed had more than about 10% impervious cover, then it was at risk. We have very strong data for our particular watershed that risk pivot point or tipping point is actually about 2.7 or 2.8%, which is much, much smaller. So that says, it says a lot about the way we have to direct our protection efforts. Again, a lot of our work in the early days of the organization was focused on trying to understand the hydrology and where we might put our restoration efforts, both geographically and in the kind of practices. As might not be a surprise to many of you who are involved in water issues, this question of how water flows through a watershed, and particularly through one that has been damaged due to land practices, is paramount. In fact, our newest version of stormwater regulations has brought this science to a fore, where we're looking not only at the pollutants that are coming off of developed lands, but we're also looking at the amount of water coming off of developed lands as a pollutant in and of itself. In other words, if there are massive pulses of water, which we see not only in these major climatic events, but in areas where there's a lot of impervious surface, then we're going to see exceptional scouring of our streams, resulting in excessive pollution, particularly use of sediment. So we have, as well as part of our organization, we have an advisory committee that consists of staff people from each of the 4 localities. We call it our technical advisory committee. And they do things like this to try to get to really focus in on telling that story of water pollution and threats in the Rivanna watershed. So we came to the same conclusion that many in the state did, really simultaneously, and as I said, based the new stormwater regs. We've got to try to restore the original, or mimic in some way the original hydrology. And we've spent a fair amount of time discussing this question of legacy sediment, which we could talk about offline. We also invested in a fairly sophisticated land cover map that was based on 2009 aerial data. It's down to the 1 meter resolution so that we can do analysis of our particular watershed in terms of about 9 different categories of land cover. And in our earliest outreach to our local governments, we made recommendations right as the state of Virginia was just beginning to grapple with the new stormwater regs. We basically said, don't wait for that. There are practices you can do now that will help restore this watershed. And so we made a number of presentations, a lot of outreach, and again, outreach both to the elected officials and also through the staff members of our Technical Advisory Committee. We were fortunate to get a fairly sizable grant from the National Fish and Wildlife Foundation to really push some of these practices out into the watershed. And we used that as a tool to start to bring together the localities that they work together regionally in other constructs, but we wanted to make sure they all had the same information and the same kinds of tools. So basically we took over half of that grant money and put that money into each of the localities to fund demonstration projects and to link those demonstration projects by telling the story of stormwater management that's happening in the top reaches of the watershed to the kinds of stormwater management that was happening as the Rivanna exits to the James. You can see a picture of a rainwater harvesting system going in. It's collecting water off a rooftop at a public high school, and is now being used to irrigate the field that's adjacent to it. Also at that high school is a fairly sizable rain garden or bioswale. We have instrumented it, and we've got about a year's worth of data that irrevocably or irrefutably shows the reductions not only in flows, but peak flow, sediment, and nutrients. And we use that as a way to say, this does work. So those are the kinds of tools that we used really to tell the story of stormwater. We also undertook a number of studies in order to position our localities, we call them retrofit inventories, so that as these various requirements, whether it's the stormwater regs or the Chesapeake Bay TMDL, each of the localities now has a master plan of places it can go into on its own land and do retrofit for stormwater. They have modest engineering, or back of the envelope, they're not really engineering drawings, of sites and installations that they can now go after particular grant monies for or use in their CIP planning. There's some other things that we've been involved in, particularly with promoting rainwater harvesting with some of our partners, the Thomas Jefferson Soil and Water Conservation District in one of our localities, to try and get consistent regulations, at least guidance out of the state agencies, so that that is not an impediment to using stormwater management as a stormwater management tool, as a reduce and reuse tool. There's a lot of benefits to it. Our major thrust right now is to build a action plan or a watershed planning tool that brings together the variety of different plans and activities that are going on from the Bay TMDL to local comprehensive planning, so that there is some consistency and a roadmap for moving forward. I was pleased to hear how many of you talked about conserving healthy waters, because it's kind of a no-brainer, but in the world of water quality protection and the implementation of the Clean Water Act, both at the federal level and also the mandate for the Commonwealth of Virginia, this notion of protecting what we have and it being unlawful to degrade it has gotten second shrift. Is that the right term? Shrift? Short shrift. Thank you. Oh, I do that a lot. But as we know, we have thousands of impairments. The list grows with every report. We have an anti-degradation clause as part of the Clean Water Act. We have certain tools in the state of Virginia, but we aren't acting on that. And that's a serious, serious problem. You'll see I took some of these slides from Virginia DCR. DCR has had a program of identifying and conserving healthy waters in the Commonwealth of Virginia. These are some of the reasons why. It's everything from institutional inertia to not really putting numbers on how big this issue is. We all say it. I mean, half of you had that, either had it in your mind or you said something to the same effect. Like I said, what's your concern? It's about losing that which we still have. But there's things that we bump up against. One of the major ones is that our monitoring programs and our protection programs go after identifying waters that have no longer meet the standards and are therefore then qualify for cleanup, which one might say is sort of a backwards way of spending one's money. So early on in the history of the River Basin Commission, we've been staffed for 3 years, been around for about 5. This has been one of our really main focuses of not only building consensus, but really educating our local elected officials. So we took part in a project with our DCR and Virginia VCU to identify, using a particular methodology that has been used almost all over the state, to identify good or restorable waters. And there's a map of our watershed, and it's got some of the features that we particularly are looking for is fish species and intact streamside habitat. I like this slide because these are all the good reasons. And then the flip side of it is how to translate this into action on the ground and also through our political system. Switching gears, but not at all unrelated, is the Bay TMDL, which, as many of you know, is orchestrated to clean up an already impaired water. And Jason did go over the basic issues with the Bay TMDL. Has to do with setting pollution diet and plans for cleaning up the bay with respect to nutrients, nitrogen and phosphorus, and sediment loads. People comfortable with the notion of a TMDL or want any particular? Can we move through this? Okay. See me separately if you want to ask any questions. But remember that a TMDL is both the loading, or that which is allowable or assimilatable by a water body and still will be healthy, and the plan and the process for getting here. These slides come both from EPA and also from a pilot project that Connie Brennan spoke of that we overlapped on last year. We put together, out of concern, actually very early concern, that this Bay TMDL might kind of railroad over local governments and over the work that we were trying to do. We put together a team. And we were not looking for a across-the-board representative group of people to help steer this. We got a fair amount of criticism from different interest groups from the outside, but our steering group was who showed up after we made a couple of presentations. Actually turned out to be fairly representative. And our goal was, with the blessing and some modest resources of support from DCR and EPA, to try to figure out what are the best strategies for local engagement. And we had many, many meetings, but this was kind of our flow chart. We decided we would start with local government. This was back in early 2010. And then break up into a variety of meetings that were very focused on different sources or interest groups. And these are the groups that we defined: agriculture in its variety of manifestations, building and development, the permit holders, whether it was MS4, which is stormwater, or point sources, which is wastewater. And then as an entity unto themselves, the local government officials. We hosted focus groups that were by invitation only, We felt we knew our community well enough that we could identify individuals who would be helpful to the process in that they were not afraid to speak their minds, that they were definitely not part of the choir, that they would be respected by their peers and not seen as someone who was a pawn for either local government or the environmental community or anything like that. And I think we actually did a pretty good job of selecting the people who came to these focus groups. And I would just leave that as a thought for you as you're doing your own outreach in your communities. Of course, there's a flip side. If you're not invited, then you might suspect what's going on in the room. But in our case, we're not aware that we had a lot of bad feelings as a result of this process. And we did a lot of education. It was a pretty complicated time because there was a lot going on at the national and state level in terms of ATMDL. But we really, we did the kind of thing that I did first thing here. You know, what do you know? What are you concerned about? What's your story? Where are you getting your information? Always a key question to ask. And where would you like to get your information? Who do you trust? Who do you like to listen to? You know, where do you go? You know, surprising the number of people who, in the farming group, for example, who said, we get it from the Chesapeake Bay Foundation. Now, the Bay Foundation's done tremendous work in outreach to farmers, and, you know, it's like, okay, good. But, you know, 3/4 or more said, you know, we get it from the Extension Service, or we get it from the Soil Water Conservation Districts. So, you know, it was a way to start to build that relationship around this particular issue. We had a lot of feedback, which we then turned around and gave both to the state and to EPA. None of this is particularly surprising, but again, part of what we were doing was bringing people to the table to talk and share what their concerns were about what at the time was a pretty unknown animal, this bay cleanup process. It was quite hard to understand if you weren't living and breathing it every single day, and therefore there was a lot of fear that was generated in a lot of sectors about it. Some of the observations, again, this is true for anyone who does work in the environmental field. This is complex stuff. You don't want to dumb it down. You don't want to, but you don't want to leave out sort of the key things that are important for stating a position or helping people understand what the impacts are. And that's obviously a very fine line. It's not bad to repeat things. And that's why I think we come to these kind of presentations, is we like to hear the way somebody else has to say things. I know constantly there's probably not any conversation that I don't learn something from. And so it's really okay to repeat. Different people have different learning styles. This was in particular some of the concerns of local governments and elected officials. Not at all unsurprising, but we're seeing this kind of conversation continue into 2011, the kinds of concerns that local governments have about how are they going to grapple with the requirements of the Bay Cleanup Plan. And this is really, really important, whether the issue is air or water or solid waste. You could insert that into this statement. Any one of your issues is just one of the many things that our local governments are grappling with. So in our case, in this process, we heard a lot of, you know, just tell us when you know what you want us to do, and then we'll figure out if and how we can do it. And some of that persists to this day. Without recognizing the multitude of stressors and information and understanding that our elected officials really have to absorb, you know, it's our job as people who are trying to protect watersheds or clean air to translate the information that we have and to truly acknowledge the pressures on our elected officials. And I think even if they may not agree with us, it can go a very long way if we can have that kind of acknowledgement so that there's a door open to say, you know, we understand this is difficult. was kind of our pitch from the start in terms of local water quality, just because in our watershed, at any rate, it's a picture of the land cover map that I had talked about. Our data is what we trust in our locality. We are lucky to have it, but most localities have some data, and they have the capacity to even do volunteer data. So again, that's what resonates with people who live in a particular community. And for us, as it might be true in this region also, you know, local water quality is what drives the conversation. If you live in Tidewater, it is the Bay, or it is the Lower James, or it is the Lower Rat, but not up here. But what Jason said was, if we can organize our efforts around local water quality, I think most people are really quite convinced, regardless of what the model says, then we will end up with the best of both worlds. Clean local water and a restored Chesapeake Bay. Well, I said something to this effect, you know, simplifying the language but not the science. We believe at the Rivanna Watershed, we believe that this is an opportunity. It is the show that's going in the world of water. It is what's going on now, so we have to translate the work that we're trying to do in terms of land conservation, in terms of ecological restoration, in terms of protecting forests. We have to translate that in terms of the Bay TMDL. Otherwise, we're not going to get traction in our community, because that's the conversation that's going on, or at least where the fear resides. I'm really pleased to say that we're the recipient of a small grant to help do outreach about the Bay TMDL in our region. And in this case, we're partnering with our local advocacy group, citizen-based advocacy group, the Rivanna Conservation Society. And the commission will focus on local government, and the Conservation Society will do the kinds of work that a 501c3 can do. So stay tuned. This is a little snapshot of what, you know, good, bad, and in between. So that's what I have to share with you. I suspect many of you know a lot of what I've already said, but if I've given you just a little slightly different point of view, I hope that it's been of value, and I'd be happy to take any questions or comments. I'm not sure, we're at 11:15. I'm not sure how we're doing the timing, but we'll go to 11:30. So questions, comments? Thoughts? Yes, sir.
In partnering with the local conservation river society and
Yep.
you all reach out to them and they approach.
I think the way that happened was we approached them. The task at hand required, the people who were funding it rightly required that outreach go not only to and through local governments, which is the entity through which the so-called Phase 2 WIP is being built up with data from the local governments, but also that there be outreach to the general public. And the latter is not in our mission. It's not in our capacity. It's not in our mission. So it totally made sense to partner with this group. It totally also makes sense because in our neck of the woods, we have a lot of different groups doing different things. And I think it pleases everybody. You know, well, I'll say two different things. I think it pleases people to know that groups are working well together, and that where their interests align, they are not afraid of doing so. And where the message is consistent, they're not afraid of doing so. We absolutely need hardcore advocacy on one end and the much softer, slower, challenging work of working through the political process, which is really what the commission is about, kind of at the other end of the spectrum. But there is a common message there, and where we can both be speaking that message, I think we amplify the effectiveness. Does that answer your question?
Yes.
Yeah. Other questions or comments? Yes?
I'm on the Hampton Roads Regional Stakeholders Group with
Yes.
Hampton Roads PDC,
Mhm.
TMDL, and Watershed Implementation Plan. And what seems real, well, there are a couple of things that are causing a whole lot of stress for people. And one is the deadlines
Yes.
that they're being asked to meet without the tools that they've been promised.
Yeah.
And that crunch is causing a whole lot of stress for local governments. But what also seems really clear is that these new goals are not going to be met with private property, with public property initiatives alone. Stormwater management has been pretty much within the responsibility of the local government and, through MS4 permits. And these new goals are not going to, they can't meet these goals this way. So they really need us. Because they're going to have to reach out much more aggressively to private property owners, to the development community, to the business community, to meet higher standards if they're going to reach these goals. So they need us very badly to be the interface with the private property owners and that whole community.
Yes, I couldn't agree with you more, Karen. And in that, I would say, our job, sort of collectively, is to find that common ground. And I submit that if you were to take any group of people, I don't care what their political persuasion is, and you ask them about the importance of cleaner, healthy water, you will get pretty much the same answers. So it might be that those conversations have to start there. It's not about preaching to the choir, even though we have to do that to raise our money and do the things that we do. But it is, it's the people that you see across the aisle in church. It's the people that you see in line at the food line. It's everybody that we need to get engaged. And those groups like Lynnhaven River Now, right? Did I get it right? Because it changed. That's why I was fumbling. Ravenna Conservation Society, many of you here in this room, you have the tools, and we need that message to get out in a way where it hits people in a place of essentialness. We can't live without. So, it's a really good point. Any other comments, questions? Sure.
I was just thinking in terms of what you asked us before and what water means to us. A lot of thoughts have gone around. One thing to me is that it's always free. It doesn't cost us anything. Therefore, we don't value it very much. And as opposed to, for instance, when I lived in Europe, you turned it off immediately. And you didn't drink anything unless you knew it was potable. And we wash our cars with water that's potable. We flush our toilets with water that's potable. Why don't we have a system that recycles within a household what doesn't have to be, we don't have to drink, we don't have to cook with, we don't have to eat. I don't understand that. And I think in San Francisco, for instance, when I was there, the water bill was based on consumption. And you were charged a lot more if you used more. Now, it was really hard on us who'd already conserved. And then they put that into practice, and you can't go below it, save water, shower with a friend, those kinds of things. But you have to, I feel as if there should be a value, there should be a system where those who conserve are rewarded.
Well, yes, and if you live in an urban area, as I do, we do pay for our water, and we pay for our sewer as a percentage of that. If you live in a more rural area, if your water is coming from the well, you're paying in a different kind of a way, but you are absolutely right. And that is actually one of the reasons we promote rainwater harvesting. There is no point to be going through the expense and the cost of treating water to become potable and then using it to irrigate your lawn. It's a really poor use of resources. So I couldn't agree with you more. And there are things happening in terms of the state building codes and these guidelines for use of water, and through the Virginia Department of Environmental Quality and Department of Health, there's actually reuse of water guidelines and regulations that are emerging. So with all the focus on green building and LEED certification, I think you're going to see more and more of that. And through our state agencies and the statewide water planning process that is underway now, I have a feeling that will happen. But it's not bad to be advocating it for rural areas now. I think it's really important.